Wrestling, an instinctive behavior. Like animals, man has this nature in him. To survive, conquer and defend himself, but also for pleasure. He codifies, through the ages, countless forms of confrontation to satisfy this need. At the Olympics, he wants to go faster, higher, stronger. That is the motto. In this secular gathering where he never ceases to confront, wrestling has been present since the beginning. Today, more than 700 forms of combat are recorded. Among them, many use melee. These forms of fighting are based on different rules, depending on the culture, and are present in almost all countries. Yet, only one is now uniquely codified in more than 180 nations: Olympic wrestling. But Thunder in 2013. To everybody's astonishment, the IOC Executive Committee is proposing to take wrestling out of the game program. Misunderstanding is global. In some countries, the disaster is cultural. The Olympics without wrestling? Unthinkable. The world is moving and reacting. Countless countries are shouting at the Olympic benchmarks. The IOC hears and catches up, for a time only, the pillar of the Games. In a French junior high school, the surprise is also of size. A teacher, very involved in the world of wrestling, is challenged by the size of the movement. Save Olympic wrestling. The decision of the IOC will give this former high-level athlete a singular idea. From his school, the project Wrestling Around the World starts. A team that wants to understand why the movement of wrestling is so important. Its objective? To show the true place of wrestling throughout the world, and so justify its return to the Olympics. This coach is not on his first trip around the world, but he is far from knowing where this idea will take him. The echo that will be given to his project will exceed all his expectations. More than a year will be required for the implementation of the project. The journey around the world is difficult to establish. The choice of destination is subject to many factors that regularly change the circuits, and the team's constitution must meet many criteria. But above all, it is necessary to establish funding strategy. The budget is huge for this team, alone on the starting line. It must prove the interest of their project to convince partners. The team is rigorously selected. Young athletes who represent the future. They exchange easily and are able to adapt to sometimes difficult and unexpected situations. For such a crazy project, you also have to find very special people. A passionate coach, a combat sport technician, and a cameraman conscious of committing himself to a singular adventure. On the day of departure, no one suspected that the project would last more than 2 years, and that this team would spend almost 6 months abroad to achieve its project. By road, by boat or by air, they set out to meet those countries that live on wrestling. In high-level training centers, but also in the heart of the most isolated villages, where this sport has been perpetuated for millennia. A wonderful sporting, human and cultural adventure begins.
Les mômes, parce que tu les prends comme ça et que tu les emmènes. T'as pas peur?
Ouais, alors là, tu touches un domaine sensible. Aujourd'hui, on ne veut plus prendre de responsabilités. Et là, nous, malgré tout, l'amour de notre discipline, notre passion, elle nous fait prendre le risque de partir quand même. Alors, on l'a fait de manière professionnelle. On a tout cadré, tout est carré. Les cadres sont sérieux. Je pense qu'il n'y aura pas de souci. J'ai confiance en mes cadres, j'ai confiance aux gamins. Ça va bien se passer.
Our team is French. Is it chance that wanted it so? Maybe not. In wanting to remove a route from the Olympic program, it's Pierre de Coubertin who was disturbed in his sleep. It might have been written that French people would struggle again to preserve the Olympic tradition. Switzerland is also a priority destination. At the headquarters of the International Federation, our team is presented to President Lalovic, who is very interested in the idea. An appointment is taken in a few months in Uzbekistan to report on the progress of the project. A stone's throw from the International Federation, it is with history that we now have an appointment. The visit of the Olympic Museum in Lausanne is a good introduction for our young people. In this place dedicated to the history of the Games, they easily situate the place of wrestling within the Olympic programs. The modern Olympic Games were renovated by Baron Pierre de Coubertin in 1894. But the origin of the Games dates back in the 8th century BC. At the time, they were held in Greece, notably in the religious center of Olympia. Wrestling is already well positioned. But other forms of wrestling date back much further in antiquity, as shown by the site of Beni Hassan in Egypt in 2000 BC. Although it has been associated for a long time with war, wrestling will gradually become part of the playful activities of the people. Because of festive or religious features, specialists are currently listing more than 700 living styles spread all over the world. These many styles are now recognized by the United World Wrestling. This federation allows all these forms of wrestling to be represented in games in a unique form, the Olympic wrestling. Perhaps it is one of the reasons for the magnitude of the Save Olympic Wrestling movement. The celebration of the Games includes many rituals and symbols: the Olympic flag, the Olympic flame, the opening and closing ceremonies of the Games, rituals that make the history of sport, rituals that it is difficult to jostle because they are part of our traditions. In the museum, in front of the model of the site of Olympia, our young people realize more accurately what the ancient Olympic Games were. When imagination becomes reality, emotion is touchable. We are now inside the Palace of Olympia, the training site of wrestlers, in Greece. At the heart of these magnificent monuments, because they cannot reproduce a training, they immortalized the event. During the 20th century, the IOC necessarily adapted the Games to economical, political, and social changes. Removing wrestling from the Olympic program would mean for our young people forgetting this past. The meeting with the representatives of the municipality of Olympia will reinforce this feeling. The elected officials explain their struggle to maintain the departure of the flame from the historic site of Olympia. A fight certainly economic for the city, but also the expression of their attachment to the traditions. The president of the Greek Federation, Mr. Konstantinos Stanos, welcomes us in Athens. He is involved in the Save Olympic Wrestling movement and encourages us to associate a maximum numbers of federations with our action.
The Hellenic Wrestling Federation, the Ministry of Sport, and all the authorities have reacted very strongly here. We believe that wrestling is a fundamental sport of the Olympic Games, and we cannot imagine the Olympics without it.
In the course of our journey, this opinion will keep up straightening. Wrestling is a practice inherent to man because its implantation is simple. The existence of countless traditional wrestling forms throughout the world is the proof of it. We want to discover what they have in common and what associates them in the way with the Olympic wrestling. As soon as we get to Turkey, we get in touch with the president of the Turkish Federation, Mr. Hamza Yelinkaya, and learn that a prestigious traditional wrestling tournament is taking place the next day in Kumlucha. We travel more than 1,000 kilometers overnight not to miss the show. Wrestling is undoubtedly one of the most practiced sports in the world. Every civilization, every community, every ethnic group has developed its own style. In Turkey, as in other countries, wrestling is a national sport. The traditional form, called güreş, is practiced with the body coated in oil. The rules are simple, adapted to the environment. They define a place of practice, a dress code, and a system of points very accessible to the public. Our team is welcomed by the mayor of the city. More than 800 wrestlers are gathered for this event. Wrestling takes place on grass. The wrestlers arrive in successive waves and engage in a religious ritual before fighting. Everything is very well organized. A lot of fighting takes place on a very short time. Under a blazing sun, some actions can last up to half an hour. Throughout the matches, we see many similarities with the Olympic style. Similar technical gestures, a common goal to bring his opponent on his back, visible signs of respect. During the competition, gestures of protest are virtually absent. The singularity of this style lies in the difficulty in grasping his opponent. The oil spilled on the bodies make this gesture impossible. The kispet, very strong leather trousers, is an effective alternative. Impressed by this show, we do not resist the urge to try this practice, more than surprising. Sensations assured. We return to Bulgaria. Another country of wrestling, another land of traditions. Mr. Valentin Jordanov, president of the federation, proposes that we get to know the traditional Bulgarian wrestling on the Black Sea in Burgas. On the grass of a field that acts as a room, the categories of weight and age are not the major concern of the organizers. Only the pleasure of confrontation counts. In the heart of this village, our young people gain the respect of the locals by actively participating in the tournament. Every victory results in a cash reward directly paid by the mayor of the village. The experience is unheard of for our athletes and unforgettable. Each stage of our journey is an opportunity to practice a new traditional way of wrestling. Our visit to Uzbekistan allows us time to meet the güreş, which means wrestling in Uzbek. In a youth training center, all male styles are brought together: free wrestling, Greco-Roman, and güreş. We do not hesitate to commit ourselves to all carpets. More than 100 young people invite us to turn to compete against them. The style and the jacket of the Kurac make it look like the traditional judo, sport of gripping close to wrestling. The only additional intermediate is the jacket. Here again, we can see many points common to Olympic wrestling. The projection on the back is always decisive, but in this style of struggle, no fighting on the ground. The Kurac is closely related to the Russian Sambo, which we will have the pleasure of admiring in Azerbaijan. The first European Games of Baku are the opportunity for this Caucasian country to include in the program this traditional wrestling widespread in these regions. Sambo, created in the USSR in the 1930s, means in Russian self-defense without weapon. A mixture of several combat sports originally intended for the Russian Special Forces, the Spetsnaz. In the land of the rising sun, the sumo is legendary. Several million spectators appreciate it. This traditional Japanese struggle is not well known to Europeans. The unusual physical appearance of sumotories and the rituals that accompany the combat give place to many clichés. We must go to meet Japan and sumotori to appreciate the subtlety of this sport and understand the state of mind that qualifies this country. Respect. The birth of the sumo dates back to a few years before the Christian era, a discipline that looks simple and that managed to last through the century without losing its authenticity. Like many traditional types of wrestling, sumo is marked by religion, a collection of rituals that communicate with nature. The hierarchy of the sumotori is very pyramidal. It applies to about 900 wrestlers. Only 4 of them, maximum, will reach the title of Supreme Champion, the Yokozuna. The aim pursued by the sumotori has not varied over the centuries. You have to expel your opponent from the combat area or throw him on the ground. But unlike other combat sports, there is no weight category. On the dojo, name given to the sacred fighting area, pushing is inescapable. The area is twice smaller than an Olympic mat. Therefore, we understand the importance of this gesture, reinforced by the body mass of the wrestlers. However, we must not rely on appearances and doubt the capabilities of these athletes. Mr. Koichi Sato, principal of Saitama Sakae High School, invites us to take part in the training of young sumotoris. Training is very physical, and some exercise cannot be held over time. Sumotoris try to lower the center of gravity to the maximum. Their push work is also formidable. Some of these young people will join one of the prestigious tables in the Ryogoku district. One day, they will fight in the National Palace of the Sumo, the Kokujikan. Thousands of miles away, in the great Canadian North, wrestling is even practiced on snow. We will not have the opportunity to climb the pack ice, but the icy winter of the Great Lakes will allow us to experience another tradition. Pierre Chartier, a teacher in St. Clair High School in Toronto, tells us that the Inuit fighting area is delimited by ashes. During the match, the player who takes off his opponent from the ground wins the fight. As for projection, no problem. The environment is an ideal mat. If some traditional struggles, such as the Inuit struggle, are less well known, this is because of their geographical isolation. But on the American continent, there is one that enjoys surprising popularity: folk wrestling. Established in American universities, like basketball, folk wrestling is the first individual American sport. In the United States, nearly 1 million people are concerned with wrestling. The American traditional style developed considerably during the 20th century. The Olympic performance followed this development and increased the popularity of the sport. But wrestling is also a reflection of the American spirit. We realize this by going through the sports halls that showcase effort, commitment, and performance. Today, it is a real institution that brings together large crowds. Folk wrestling is close to the Olympic free wrestling. The combat area is identical. Apart from a mandatory helmet, there is nothing to differentiate the outfits of the wrestlers. In contact with Jeremiah Weber, our host and university coach, we discover a subtle difference between the spirits of the Olympic style and that of folk wrestling. While Olympic wrestling favors spectacular actions and risk-taking, academic wrestling encourages control and mastery of its opponent. This criterion is decisive in the absence of victory by pinfall. Change of scenery. After the comfort of the American sports hall, the next step is a type of wrestling that is practiced outside. The annual meeting of the Confederation of West African Countries takes us to Dakar, where many countries are gathered for the Senegalese Wrestling Championship. After the grass, the snow, the earth, it is now the sun that will be the playground of the wrestlers. Papis Gones, a very popular champion in Senegal, was immediately aware of our action in favor of wrestling. We are proposed to discover all the aspects of his discipline in his company. We get to know an amazing mixture of combats, dances, and rituals. For 2 days, we can see a succession of scenes coming from the past. Heat, colors, sound and images enchant us. On the rhythm of the instruments and song that never stop, the fights follow one another for hours. The dance is constantly part of the decor. Artists and athletes constantly communicate. The marabouts enchant the athletes who repeat their rites. The body seems carved in marble. Senegalese wrestling is practiced on a circle of sand. Simple rules declare the winner the one who makes his opponent fall. And there is no fighting on the ground. Again, one understands how easy it is to practice the discipline which requires nothing except a layer of sand. More than 300,000 people are practicing this style of wrestling in Senegal, and it is easy for us to learn this tradition. In the neighborhood, we will still have the pleasure of exchanging about this practice.
Merci Racine. J'espère que vous avez bien apprécié la démonstration.
But just a stone's throw from us, there are also traditional types of wrestling whose wealth is not suspected. The ancient Celtic civilization, of which several people still retain traces of languages, gave birth to two types of traditional wrestling, the Backhold and the Guren. These two types of wrestling now associate 12 nations which meet every 2 years on the occasion of the European Championships of Celtic Wrestling. The tournament is taking place this year in France, in Brest. The rules are not a surprise for us. There is a need to make full and again the absence of fight on the ground. Oaths and rituals are always present. And the similarity of styles make it not uncommon for wrestlers to practice both disciplines. Once again, we have the opportunity to try these traditional fights, and once again, our basis of Olympic wrestlings allow us to appreciate the many sensations. Fighting for pleasure is part of the nature of man. But the seeking recognition of a trophy also motivates the combatants. At a Guren tournament, the winner triumphed by performing a round of honor with a ram on his back. And other struggles reward their champions with a much bigger trophy. On the occasion of the Swiss Alpine Games, a stadium of more than 50,000 people has been built to watch the election of the King of Wrestling. He will be offered a ball. On our side, we are witnessing a more modest championship, bringing together athletes aged 16 to 19. From 3,000 to 5,000 people attend the show all the same. And the trophies are no less surprising. In this style of popular wrestling named Schwingen, special pants are worn by wrestlers who clash on round of sawdust. The traditional Swiss wrestling, also known as fight in the pants, imposes grasping the trousers in one hand, while the other is hung on a thick leather belt. Here too, the rule is simple. Simply make the opponent fall on his back to win the pass, as they call it. More than the trophy, the wrestling champion enjoys great popularity in Switzerland. This modern sporting discipline has kept its very ancient origins. Many customs and traditions are closely linked to this sport. Among them, we are aware of a mark of respect. After the end of the pass, the winner traditionally removes the sawdust hanging on the back of the loser. We do not fail to try again this form of wrestling, which gives us the pleasure of diving into sawdust. The circle is constantly moistened, but also salty to make wrestlers spit sawdust that they could swallow when on the ground. Our last encounter with a traditional fight will not be the least. In Mongolia, wrestling is the national sport. In this country that lives in harmony with nature, above all, it is necessary to absorb the way of life in order to understand the traditions. In a context where even training takes place in communication with nature, we quickly get to know traditional wrestling. It is not difficult to find a place where it shows up. As soon as we are on the spot, magic has its effect. The rituals begin. Traditional wrestling and Olympic wrestling are highly publicized in Mongolia. They are indissociable. 70% of the Mongolian Olympic medals are obtained by wrestlers. Mongolian wrestling begins with the dance of Garuda, a mythical bird with the appearance of a giant eagle. It is said that this is to show and impress the opponents that the wrestlers dance in this way, imitating the flapping of the wing of a bird. As always, during the fight, the fall of the opponent is decisive. Here again, the absence of weight division explains the unusually body shape of the athletes. Finally, the courtesy of the wrestlers cannot escape the viewer. One does not attack an opponent whose outfit is detached, the opponent whose fall has been brought about, and finally, we pass under the wing of the bird at the end of the fight. The biggest traditional event in Mongolia is the Nadam. For 3 days, the fight, the archery and the horse races are the heart of the festival inscribed in the cultural heritage of the UNESCO. 1,024 wrestlers from a national selection compete to become the national lion. Throughout the experiences we live, all these fights seem to be part of the same family. Our Olympic style, which has encouraged to come and meet them, is a reflection of all these traditions. It unites the wrestlers of the whole world. It is the link between tradition and modernity. Over time, Olympic wrestling has been harmonized at the international level. It has structures, rules, and official competitions. Within the new federation, the notion of universality of struggle takes on its full dimension. True links are woven between traditional wrestling and Olympic wrestling. Now codified in a unique way, the Olympic wrestling comes from centuries of experience. However, it never ceases to amaze by what its creativity, again and again, to achieve the goals common to all these fights. Make one's opponent fall and immobilize. Our young team will be pleased to make sure of each of it at each of its meetings. At all levels of practice, it will see the virtues of a discipline that has crossed the gates of time. Excellence is presented to us in the many national centers that open their doors to us. We discover the quality of the training of the youngest, but also the greatest champions. In these many centers, one dedicates one's life to the wrestling. At the European Championships, at the World Championships, at the Continental and Olympic Games, the high level offers its impressive performances. Action, emotions, passion are present. For all these athletes, the aim is not here to win a ram or a bull. It's about winning the right to participate in the Olympic Games one day. Since Milon de Croton, who would have won them 6 times according to legend, everybody is dreaming of that. In the tiny halls that welcome us, the Olympic dream is cultivated. In the 4 corners of the world, our team meets the passion of wrestling. In each hall, we find the gestures that characterize it. Some, unchangeable, have gone through time. Like the traditional fights, we seek the fall by only grasping the body. We stop on the ground, since a mat allows to continue the fight without risk for the opponent. And at the end of the meeting, one always shows his respect. This desire to perpetuate traditions, however, does not make wrestling a frozen discipline. Over time, it opens up to modernity. It adapts to the expectations of practitioners and institutions. Supported by the work of a scientific committee, gestures are perfected until they reach an incredible level of precision. The rules follow the needs of the show. They are controlled by a trained arbitral body. Technology makes it possible to analyze, prepare, judge gestures of extreme complexity. And communication takes the most modern ways. In 2004, one of the biggest steps of the evolution of this ancestral practice is taken. For the first time, the women's fight makes its appearance at the Olympic Games. A true heading for a fighting discipline reserved for men ever since.
Yes, I mean, for female wrestling to be part of the Olympic Games is huge. I think the sport has grown a lot since 2004, and it gives us, like, why shouldn't women have the same opportunity as the men? And now, last year when, like, wrestling, maybe they said wrestling is not going to be a part of the Olympic Games anymore. I think it's just made our sport grow stronger, like all the countries came together and found a way to keep wrestling in the Olympics. So I just think in the end it made the sport stronger.
Very quickly, this transition to the modern era is appreciated by the public. Our team crosses these modern female warriors in many countries. The quality is present. They quickly acquire an extraordinary expertise and give birth to a true feminine style of very high level. This new image of the struggling woman is gradually becoming unanimous in a very masculine world. At the first European Games in Baku, the president of the Azerbaijan Republic congratulated his champions. In Iran, women's wrestling is taking its first steps.
And I really look forward to see our girls in the Olympic Games, but we're living with hope. We look forward to see that. One day it will happen.
Everywhere, minds adapt to the image of a woman who fights.
It was the first time I attended in a female wrestling competition. I really enjoyed that. I look forward to see even better.
The view on women's practices is evolving, and the Olympic wrestling fully participates in this evolution. During our 2 years of quest, another aspect of wrestling marks our team: institutional recognition. Our project, Wrestling Around the World, is always warmly welcomed by the institutions, and many are the personalities who enhance that original disciplines, such as the wrestling, are inseparable from the Olympic history. Within municipalities, sport bodies, and embassies, we see the world's political commitment to the traditional values of wrestling.
Cette discipline était quand même la discipline mère et, me semblait-il, devait le rester.
Vous pensez quoi de notre projet? Qu'en pensez-vous?
C'est un très beau projet, méritoire, courageux, universel. C'est un projet qui mérite d'être encouragé et je vous souhaite le plus grand des succès.
C'est un projet qui est mené par un Clusien, mais au niveau national, qui prend une envergure internationale. Le maire, il doit suivre ce type de projet.
Quand j'ai appris que vous étiez lancé dans cette initiative, j'ai été absolument subjugué. C'est super de faire quelque chose comme ça, c'est super. D'abord, ça s'est jamais fait, que des jeunes prennent l'avenir de leur sport en main. Je trouve ça absolument exceptionnel. La question va se reposer en 2024, hein, le combat n'est pas fini. Je ne vous souhaite même pas bonne chance, je suis sûr que ça va porter des résultats.
The place of traditional sports, such as wrestling, within the Olympic programs raises the question of the opposition or, on the other end, of the complementarity between tradition and modernity. I believe that it is indispensable that there is a complementarity and that the historical sports, such as wrestling, would be a part of the Olympic program. This doesn't mean that modern sports shouldn't be included as well.
We are now able to measure the size of our discipline within the sporting world and better understand the shock caused by its possible suppression of the Olympic programs. A shock that has engendered a global reaction. A shock that also gave birth to our project, and which allowed us to discover an astonishing peculiarity of this sport of opposition. A phenomenon that will mark our team throughout its journey. A form of solidarity called wrestling family. Wherever we go, doors open. The welcome is in the measure of the means. The debates follow, the evenings are longer. Wrestling and its practice are the essential subjects. We have access to a breathtaking view of our discipline. But what is the motivation for such a welcome? Of course, we defend the same history, the same traditions, but something else seems to exist beyond the impulse of solidarity that moves us. It is a singular form of relations that we discover during each encounter. At our opening demonstration across Europe, the first sign of sympathy surprised us. They succeed one another beyond our expectations, each one warmer than the others. This extraordinary mobilization leads us to Uzbekistan, at a World Congress of the Federation, where we are suggested to extend our action in the four corners of the world. Did this crazy idea have a chance to succeed without the enormous burst of solidarity expressed by all these wrestlers? Certainly not. In Japan, the welcome is the same. Everyone has the pleasure to introduce their culture, their traditions, to show their practice of wrestling, its contributions, its differences. On the American continent, an Iranian doctor decides to take charge of us. He introduces us to the Athletic Club of New York and the association Beat the Streets, which is the origin of many events for the promotion of wrestling. Many people welcome us and help us set up our document. In Columbus, in the heart of Ohio, a coach, for whom we were unknown a few days before our arrival, graciously opens the door of his house for several days and introduces us to the American academic wrestling.
This is a huge project. I can't imagine the undertaking that it's going through financially and logistically. I'm not a man of extended financial means, so I can't give financially, but I've invited all 10 members of the program into my home. They've been staying for the weekend. We've gotten some free tickets, some complimentary tickets from the OHSAA. So any way that we can give is extremely important to keep this program alive. Financial donations or just giving in the spirit sense of supporting the program is extremely important.
This particular link between combatants, between wrestlers, is present everywhere.
Wrestling family it's not blood. You might share some blood on the mat, but it's not blood. It's not real relatives. But wrestlers have this unspoken bond. When one person knows the struggle that another person's been through, there's a connection. And wrestling is a very, very difficult sport. It takes a lot of sweat, a lot of tears, a lot of blood to work through and to become good. And anybody that goes through that type of struggle, they form a family bond. It's almost automatic. You see someone with a little cauliflower ear, and you know there's an instant connection.
In the Middle East, relationships are established with strangers. In the street, from a simple physical wrestler's mark. As soon as our will to train is expressed, proposals for exchanges on our practices are offered. Friendship ties are born very quickly. We live together. In all the countries we pass through, the sports bodies are listening to our requests. They welcome us and help us. In Africa, how not to be conquered by the simplicity of exchanges on the beaches or in the streets. Simplicity, that is the strength of wrestling throughout the world. The welcome, the relations, and the support we are shown impose as an exemplary relational phenomenon linked to our sport. This singularity, which we call the wrestling family, is the product of the harshness of our sport. All people fight. Everyone knows what commitment this requires, what virtues that entails. Force, speed, mental, are led to the limits. The more intense the engagement, the more it inspires respect. This ability to confront each other to the limits unites the wrestlers in a fraternity without frontiers. They share the values of perseverance and effort. Values enshrined in Olympism. Values that make, from time out of mind, that wrestling is Olympic. For 2 years, these young wrestlers went to meet their discipline. They have committed themselves, body and soul, to discover the different aspects in order to present them to the public. They have practiced wrestling in different forms, but always in the same state of mind. This tremendous sporting, cultural, and human experience will mark them forever. In Rio, the adventure comes to an end. The great wrestling family finds themselves in the Olympic Games to admire the spectacle of the combats and to live together magnificent emotions.
On savait que ça existait la Wrestling Family, mais on pensait pas que c'était aussi fort. Partout où on allait, en fait, il suffisait de dire qu'on était lutteur et on était accueillis à bras ouverts. Peu importe le pays, les gens avaient rien, mais ils nous donnaient tout ce qu'ils avaient.
Notre sport unit toutes les personnes qui le pratiquent, qui travaillent pour ce sport, c'est exactement ça.
Alors en plus d'avoir trouvé une famille dans ce groupe, on a aussi trouvé une famille à travers le monde entier, parce que dès qu'il s'agit d'aider un lutteur, ils nous aident tout de suite, même s'ils ne sont pas eux-mêmes directement des lutteurs. L'esprit de la Wrestling Family, c'est un esprit qui va au-delà de la couleur de peau, de nos cultures, de notre langue. Tout le monde s'aide à partir du moment où on fait de la lutte, tout ça pour défendre la même chose.
The team realized its dream, its challenge. It can offer the sports world a broad look at the discipline. It can affirm, without reserve, that wrestling has no frontier.